Now, it's been a busy year for the royal family, rounded off, of course, with a packed schedule during the festive period, as always.
Now, with 2024 on the horizon, attention now turns to King Charles's second full year in charge and the possibility of some royal tours overseas. So, what exactly lies in store for the monarchy in the next year?
Let's talk to royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, who joins us now. Good to see you, as always, Richard. So, what is in store, particularly for the King and Queen this coming year?
Well, as you say, royal trips abroad, probably our best use of soft power, are very definitely on the schedule. As Queen Elizabeth always used to say, I must be seen to be believed. She wore bright colours, as we know, so that she did stand out, and also, of course, was the world's most travelled monarch. So reports indicate that King Charles and Queen Camilla have Canada lined up, and also it's thought later in the year the Antipodes, most significant this because of course they're still royal realms, and this builds on the success of last year's trips to Germany and subsequently to France and also to Kenya, where it was a somewhat sensitive situation. Also, I think it's very, very important that the Prince and Princess of Wales, who after all in the world's most high-profile royal family are the world's most glamorous royal couple. I mean, they reportedly have a trip early next year to Italy lined up. Now that will be, I think, very significant because they haven't actually been abroad together since the ill-fated tour of the Caribbean, which was back in March last year.
But they have been doing such a wonderful job, haven't they? I mean, the Waleses, I feel, in the past year have just really come into their own as a family. And we're talking about soft power. I mean, the images of the Wales family, just people absolutely adore them, don't they? And we saw that even in the Carol concert last week.
Well, that was beautifully handled. And I mean, it's Catherine's annual charity event, and one that's amazingly successful. Anything they put their hand to, I mean, has a very special cachet, because, I mean, we've seen in the last year, for example, William visited British troops in Ukraine, there were trips to New York for the Earthshot Prize, also Kuwait, Singapore, subsequently for the actual Earthshot ceremony. I mean, there's no doubt at all, if you look at the tours that they've undertaken in the last decade or so, I mean, they have a higher profile than any other. So this benefits both the host country and, of course, Britain, because these trips are so useful for cultural exchanges, trade matters, and so forth. They really are very, very significant. Of course, where there are protests or demands for reparations occurred in the Caribbean, I mean, they were given a tremendous amount of publicity. In reality, a good deal of the Caribbean trip went well, but it's the fact that anything that is a problem, and occasionally the Queen visited, for example, India in the 90s or Quebec in the 60s, there were problems. The moment there's a problem on a royal trip abroad, of course, it becomes international news, and that is unfair, but it's the way of the world.
Can I ask you about the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh? Because I think they've really come into their own in a way that we haven't seen for years, actually. And the new titles help with all of that. And I wonder if 2024 may be a year where we see even more of them.
I think that we will be seeing more activity from the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, but the way they like it, and I think this has echoes of the way Princess Anne carries out events, they're not so high profile. They do a great deal that's under the radar. Their trips, and including trips abroad, are not followed in the detail that, for example, the King and Queen or the Waleses are. And I think that's the way they prefer it. Equally, one has to point out that there are only 4 senior working royals under 70. Now, that is not an advantage, and it inevitably will mean fewer patronages and fewer royal engagements unless others, and it's hard to see who at the moment, could take up the slack.
And Richard, just very briefly, mentioning the Sussexes, I know lots of people would rather we didn't, but do you think there's any chance of them coming back into the fold in 2024?
Well, it couldn't be worse than 2023, which began with Spare, which was, as you know, and some of that was really bizarre, some of what was included, and of course did a lot of damage, as did the interviews around it, and it ended with Endgame, which I can only call a fiasco for Omid Scobie. It's very difficult to be specific in predictions, but certainly the rift is very wide at the moment. The only way forward is probably the best way is ways we don't know, and perhaps something might be achieved there. The main thing is the Sussexes need to find a goal. They need to focus their energies on something positive, not just attack the royal family from time to time as they wish it. So we'll have to wait and see. But essentially, when the Hollywood Reporter calls you a loser, you ought to be worried, and they ought to be worried, because in fact it's William who voted the public figure who was most admired in America, and a recent poll has showed how Catherine is appreciated there too. So let's have something constructive from the Sussexes in the media, for goodness sake.
Well, here's hoping, Richard. Really good to see you. Thank you.